January 1945. Boxted Airfield, Essex, England. A thin layer of frost covered the hearts of the 56 Fighter Group, America's legendary wolf. For 2 years, these pilots had dominated the skies over Europe, shooting down more enemy aircraft than any other U.S. fighter group of the entire war. But on this bitter January morning, something new arrived on the tarmac. Something faster, sharper, and far more dangerous than anything they had flown before. The aircraft was the Republic P-47M Thunderbolt, a machine built for one reason: speed. It would go on to become the fastest Allied piston-engine fighter of World War II that actually saw combat. The story began months earlier. In late 1944, U.S. commanders were alarmed by Germany's newest threats: the jet-powered Me-262, the sleek FW-190D9, and the high-speed V-1 flying bombs. America needed a fighter that could chase down these weapons and win. Republic Aviation turned to its chief engineer, Alexander Kartveli, with an urgent order: build the fastest piston fighter the world has ever seen. The result was the P-47M. It featured a boosted R280057C engine with uprated turbo, supercharger, aerodynamic refinements across the airframe, weight reductions, and fuel flow increases. A peak speed of 473 miles per hour in official USAAF tests. No P-47 variant ever flew like this, right? But those early deliveries, they were a bit shaky. Engines surged and power dipped out of nowhere. The aircraft felt unstable at the highest altitudes. Only one fighter group was willing to tame it: the 56th, their commander, Colonel Hubert Zema, personally tested the new Thunderbolt. After returning from a brutal high-altitude run, he gave a simple order: we'll make this airplane work, and when we do, nothing will outrun it. The Wolfpack's pilots and ground crews began their own unofficial test program, experimenting with oil settings, boost pressures, prop governors, and fuel mixtures. Week by week, they transformed the raw prototype into a refined high-speed interceptor. Across the front lines, the Luftwaffe was gathering its last remaining fighters for a series of desperate counterstrikes. Germany still had teeth, and very soon the P-47M would meet them hidden. February 1945, Western Germany. The 56th Fighter Group received a new mission: protect a major 8th Air Force raid, striking the industrial heart of the Ruhr. German radar picked up the incoming bombers and multiple groupopin of FW-190D9S and B. F-109G10s scrambled to intercept. For months, these German interceptors had been almost impossible to catch. But now, the Americans had something different. The Doris were fast, around 430 miles per hour in level flight. Before the P-47M, the U.S. fighters simply couldn't close the gap, but Bostwick pushed the throttle forward. Turbo pressure surged. The P-47M leaped ahead. Climbing through thin winter air, he hit a speed near 470 miles per hour, rapidly closing the distance. At 846, he dove into the attack, firing all 850 CL Brownings. The trailing FW-190 rolled away, trying to dive out of reach. But for the first time, a Thunderbolt kept gaining. Seconds later, smoke poured from the German aircraft. Bostwick had just scored the first confirmed air-to-air kill for the P-47M. Moments later, a group of BFA-109G14s tried to break toward the bomber stream. Lieutenant Walter Gresham pushed his own P-47M into a shallow dive, accelerating so quickly that he overshot his own wingmen. He intercepted the lead 109, firing a short controlled burst and forcing the German pilot to bail out. For years, the Luftwaffe had been able to rely on speed to initiate or break off combat. Not anymore. By the end of the mission, the 8th Air Force reported something remarkable. German fighters had been stopped before they reached the bombers, thanks not to numerical advantage, but to raw speed. The P-47M had tasted combat, and it had changed the rules of engagement. March 1945, near Kassel, Germany. The war was nearing its end, but Germany unleashed its final hope. The jet-powered Messerschmitt Me-262, the fastest operational fighter of the war, capable of more than 540 miles per hour. It could strike bomber formations almost at will and escape before Allied escorts could react. Shooting down a Me-262 in level flight was nearly impossible. But the Americans had discovered a weakness. German jets were vulnerable during takeoff and landing when their engines produced slow, unstable thrust. On March 5th, a flight of P-47s from the 61st Fighter Squadron spotted a lone Mi-262 attempting to climb after a failed attack run. The section leader, Captain Gerald Johnson, recognized the opportunity instantly. He pushed the P-47M into a 20 dive, exceeding 500 miles per hour, right on the edge of the aircraft's structural limits. The Thunderbolt vibrated, but held firm. Johnson opened fire from several hundred yards. Tracers struck the right engine of the Mi-262, which burst into flames. The jet broke apart before the pilot could recover. It was one of the rarest kills of the war, a piston engine fighter downing a jet, and it was fully documented. A week later, on March 14th, Lieutenant Vernon Richards repeated the feat, catching another Mi-262 moments after takeoff and forcing the German pilot to crash land. The Wolfpack became one of the only Allied units with multiple confirmed victories against the 262. Speed alone had UNT won these engagements. Timing, altitude, and aggression mattered. But without the velocity of the P-47M, none of these interceptions would have been possible. The Americans had found a way to challenge Germany's jet age with piston engine technology pushed to its absolute limit. April 1945, Central Germany. The German Air Force was collapsing. Fuel shortages, destroyed airfields, and relentless Allied pressure left only fragments of once elite fighter wings still operational. Yet, units from JG-26, JG-2, and JG-3-001 continued to launch their last FW-190, D9, and Bf-109K4 into combat, and the aircraft they feared most was the P-47M. On April 11th, during a large strike on Leipzig, a formation of FW-190D9S attempted a desperate attack on a column of B-17. They never made it. The 56 was already above them and faster. Major Bosti claimed another confirmed kill, as did Lieutenant Francis Pinky O'Neill. For the Dora pilots, altitude and speed, once their strongest advantages, were no longer enough. By the final week of April, German resistance in the air had nearly ended. When Germany surrendered on May 8, 1945, the 56th Fighter Group had roughly 80 P-47s on strength, making it the highest speed operational piston engine fighter group in the world. Legacy, the P-47M, represented the absolute peak of American piston engineering. It became the fastest U.S. propeller fighter to see combat, a reliable counter to the FW-190D9. One of the few piston fighters with documented kills against the Mi-262, a symbol of late-war American technological superiority. It never gained the fame of the Mustang. Its combat career was too short, and the jet age arrived too quickly. But among aviation historians, the P-47M remains one of the most underrated fighters of World War II. It was the last great American piston engine interceptor, a machine that proved that even at the very end of the war, the United States could out-engineer and out-accelerate its enemies when it mattered post.